Hello, and welcome back to Righting Police Wrongs, Episode 5, where I'm producing this series where I combine my two passions, my passion for professional policing and my training with Hollywood movies and TV and the influences Hollywood has had in the last 50 years on the police subculture. And character issues in policing. If you're listening to this, you obviously found me on my website. I've talked about my book, Deterring Unconstitutional Policing. So a great deal of information and research there. If you're a police student or undergraduate or graduate student even, dealing with character issues, obviously unconstitutional policing issues, legal and unethical. Remember, there's a saying out there that, all illegal police activity is unethical. Not all unethical police activity is illegal. But I digress. So today we're going to look at the movie Pride and Glory from 2008. It's one of my, it's a favorite of mine, but just as a teaching tool, I mean, it's a neo-noir movie, another neo-noir movie. It's dark, disillusioned characters, dysfunctional families, a lot of death, not a happy ending, no happy resolve. But it is a reflection of society. 2008, it's an older movie, but a good one. Let me just address real quickly a couple quick definitions I think we need to agree on, or at least have a foundation as we move forward here. Police corruption. The definition of police corruption is corrupt acts, illegal acts by a police officer for personal gain, whether it's stealing money or they're at a homicide scene and officers steal an antique clock, or a B&E scene, they take an antique clock or something of value to them, and then that gets reported as stolen by the B&E men, or where the officers will engage in, and this is where sometimes officers conflate police corruption with noble cause corruption, or officers will plant evidence or lie to get a felony arrest where there was just a misdemeanor arrest, but there's a felony arrest because there's court time, and people don't see this from the outside world, but in the police world, court time is you're paid time and a half an hour back in the day anyway, and you were guaranteed 4 hours, even if you walked in the door at 8 a.m. and you were dismissed because whatever, the case was dismissed or the judge was sick, you got paid for 4 hours. So there will be cops out there who will illegally plant evidence, fabricate evidence, perjure themselves to get a felony arrest so that they get more court time. Police corruption, that's for personal gain. Now, I've written umpteen articles on noble cause corruption. It's not for personal gain. Noble cause corruption is corruption, planting evidence, lying, perjuring themselves, fabricating evidence. That's corruption for the cause, the noble cause, the greater good. The ends justify the means. It's our job to get predators of society off the street. So what if we bend or break the rules to enforce the law? It's noble cause. That's the noble cause. That's my job, to make society safer. And the answer to that is, but it's illegal. It's unconstitutional. And it, of course, breaches the trust with the community. So there's your corruption definitions. My other definitions. Constitutional policing is professional policing served legally, humanely, ethically, and respectfully. Oath-based policing is based on the concept that all police officers take an oath to protect, preserve, support, and defend the Constitution while they prevent, solve, control, deter crime. It's all, as long as it's all constitutional. It doesn't have to be constitutionally perfect, but we do expect our officers to be constitutionally reasonable. That is the court standard. Due diligence is the court standard. Cops need to take reasonable steps to satisfy a legal duty. And their legal duty is to enforce the law, safeguard all lives, but enforce the law constitutionally. Okay, so there's our definitions. So let's get to the plot of the movie. It's a complicated movie. It's a tough one. Starts off very sad. 4 narcotics officers are ambushed and killed in a raid. And then we find out that we have this police family, and the characters in the police family. Our Jon Voight is the ex-police chief. His oldest son, Franny Jr., is an inspector. His youngest son, Ray, is the disillusioned anti-hero protagonist. And that's Ed Norton. I refer to him as Ed Norton. And then there's Colin Farrell, who's their brother-in-law, married to their sister, and he is a corrupt sergeant. He is a corrupt sergeant for the narcotics unit, of which these 4 officers were a part of and were killed. And we find that out immediately, that they're corrupt. That unit is corrupt, the SNU unit, Street Level Narcotics Enforcement Unit. We immediately find out they're corrupt. And Jon Voight, uses guilt trips the whole movie to the Ed Norton character. Jon Voight character uses the guilt trip toward Ed Norton character constantly. You have a duty to the department, you have a duty to yourself, you have a duty to this family. And so he convinces Ed Norton to get out of missing persons, where he's been for like 7 years, on his own choice. He just wanted to get off the streets, and to be head this task force to find the guy who killed the 4 officers. And so Ed Norton, reluctantly takes on the job, and immediately finds out that the drug dealer they're looking for, who killed the 4 police officers, is Angel Tezo. And Ed Norton finds out that Tezo got a call prior to the raid from someone outside of the neighborhood, like, I don't know where, but somewhere else in New York. Got a call, and he then, through his investigation, finds out that it was from a police officer friend. Police officer friend is what this one eyewitness said. And he said, "What do you mean, police officer friend?" He said, "Yeah, friend of Tezo's is a police officer, and his name is Sandy." And so then, as the story progresses, we find out that Sandy is a part of the corrupt drug unit. He is one of the corrupt officers. And Franny, confronts Sandy. Franny Jr. is his inspector, his commanding officer. He confronts Sandy in the locker room, saying, "What do you know about Angel Tezo?" And he says to him, "If your first inclination is to lie, resist it." And he does try to lie. Sandy does try to lie, but it comes out that, yes, he made the warning call to Tezo because Tezo was a childhood friend of his and his ex-wife's cousin. And he just called him to warn him they were coming to kill him and to get out. Just get out. Tezo decided not to get out and stayed and killed the cops. And so that's Sandy's thought processes by making the phone call. And Fran's like, what are you talking about? And he says, yeah, Colin Farrell's character, he assigned these 4 guys to go in and kill Tezo. That was the mission. Kill Tezo, take his money, take his drugs, and work for a rival drug dealer, another drug dealer. That was their mission that night, and Sandy couldn't live with that, so he warned Tezo, and Tezo takes the money and gets out of there, kills cops, gets out of there. And Franny can't believe it. He's like, "What? Murder? What are you talking about?" And you can see Sandy's just, beside himself. He's like, "Yeah, everybody knew. Everybody knew." And Franny's like, "What?" That these guys were dirty cops. They were corrupt cops, stealing money, stealing drugs, robbing, disenfranchised citizens. Very, very ugly. The investigation continues, and the Ed Norton character finds out where Tezo is. He goes to an apartment. He hears some gunshots. He goes in, and who does he find there? Tazo's in a bathtub, I think. He's all beaten up, and there's Colin Farrell's character with a couple of his henchmen from the drug narcotics crew, and they're beating the hell out of him. And Ed Norton's character stops it. He goes in. He goes, "Hey, stop it! He's alive. He's still alive." And then Colin Farrell's character pulls out Ed Norton's gun out of Ed Norton's holster and shoots Tazo 3 times, and then says, "You got to be a team player. The story's going to be that you showed up first and you shot him in self-defense." And Ed Norton's beside himself. As an audience member, you're beside yourself. It's like, as a cop groupie, you're just, what just happened here? So this thing just went sideways. Now we're into murder, and in front of Ed Norton. And so he's got to deal with all that. He tells Franny, his brother, and the whole thing starts to get kind of, it just goes sideways after that. Then Sandy, right before that, Sandy has this huge guilt trip. He was confronted with Franny. Fran told him, "You're done, you're fired, or resign, but you're done. You're done being a police officer." Sandy can't handle it, and he calls up a journalist, and he goes to the journalist's car, and he starts telling him that we were bad cops. I don't have the quotes in front of me, but we sold our shield to the highest bidder. We betrayed our oath. He said all of that. And he said, I once was a good man, and he admitted to all of it: the drug dealing, stealing of drugs, the stealing of money, the robbing, the beating of citizens, and then he commits suicide in the backseat of the journalist's car. Very sad. Story comes out in the paper the next day, and it gets uglier from there. But we get back to Ed Norton, and he doesn't know what to do. He's in charge of this investigation. Now he may be charged with murder. The department's looking to charge him with murder. He will not tell Internal Affairs what happened at the scene. He doesn't want to rat out Colin Farrell's character, so he just says, "I'm not going to say anything about it." And then he goes and tells his brother Fran, and Fran's like, "What are you going to do?" Then the Jon Voight character, the father, confronts him again with more guilt. He's like, "What are you going to do? You need to step up. You need to cover up, and protect the department, protect this family, protect your brother." And Ed Norton's got this moral ambiguity. One of my themes in these movies, moral ambiguity. Duty to who? And I guess that kind of brings me right into my first trope, is competing interests and cover-ups and competing interests. And this is exactly what this moral ambiguity is that poor Ed Norton's character is confronted with. His duty to the badge, his duty to his own core values, his duty to professional policing, his duty to the oath that he took, versus his duty to the department's image, versus his duty to his family. Fran's career is on the line because these were his men. This was his narcotics unit. He's their commanding officer, and all of this guilt building up throughout, as well as the fear. I see a parallel as well as to the fear that Serpico dealt with every day in his career when he wouldn't take money. And I talked about that in the first episode, where Serpico, he feared the cops. He feared the bad cops, that somebody might take him out because, they were so entrenched in their corrupt ways. The Ed Norton character was very, very difficult for him, very challenging for him, for any officer who's uncovered corruption and doesn't want cops to get in trouble, but can't see it going forward. He has this discussion with his father. Voight's in there, and he's telling him the Jon Voight character drinks a little bit too much, and he's telling him, you have a duty. You got to protect the department. This is a layup. That became the catchphrase for the last third of the movie was, "It's a layup, Ray." His name's Ray. Ed Norton's character's name's Ray. It's a layup. All you got to do is lie. All you got to do is lie to IAB, Internal Affairs Bureau. Tell them you shot Tazo in self-defense, and this whole thing goes away, and we'll deal with our own. We'll deal with the Colin Farrell character and all of their corruption. We'll deal with it. We protect our own. I don't know how many times Jon Voight's character says that. We protect our own. Just, this is a layup. And then he does go into IA. And he says, Ed Norton says to him, this isn't going to go the way that you expect. And they're like, what? What are you talking about? We don't expect this to go anyway. And he just said, look, I'm not answering any of your questions. And then there's this reference back to Mott Haven. And this is the history, the backstory. Mott Haven, somewhere in New York, I assume, when the Ed Norton character was on the streets, he was a narcotics cop. And either way, he watched a bad cop throw a kid off of a roof, kill him, just literally kill him, throw him off an apartment roof. And it was the same scenario. He was asked to lie. He was asked to say he didn't see anything. So he did, in front of a grand jury, testify that he didn't see a thing. It cost him his marriage. It cost him his passion for policing. It cost him his pride in being a police officer. And that's when he transferred to missing persons. So he was off the streets and away from corruption. And so you have this backstory. And now here we are 7 years later, and Jon Voight and his brother Franny and anyone and everyone associated with this case is basically telling him it's just a layup. All you got to do is lie again. And he won't. He can't and he won't. And so then you have a couple of scenes where, the one scene where Franny Jr. eventually catches up with the Colin Farrell character. And he says to him, what the hell? What were you guys doing? And you got Colin Farrell's character using every defense in the book. You had to know. You had to know that this was going on. You said it yourself. You wanted crime down, collars up. He says, these are typical cop sayings. I make $65K a year, and Tazo wipes his ass with that kind of money. They're animals, he says. They're animals. That's that 1980s I talked about before, that us versus them. They're the animals on the street. They're the predators of society, and it's our duty to get rid of them. It's the ends, he says. He says, the ends justify the means. Franny, you know that. You don't ask. You look the other way. You don't want to know. And there is this legal standard in the law when it comes to supervisors. In the law, in lawsuits, whether the supervisor knew or should have known. And in this case, Franny admits, He even says to him, and this is very disturbing for someone in my position, and Franny says to Colin Farrell's character, yeah, you know what? If you were skimming some money off the top, meaning off of drug money, let's say you confiscated $50,000 and you took 10 off and then you placed $40,000 in evidence, okay, he says, I get it. But you cross the line, and that's my next trope is, what line? Who defines where this line is? It's the moral compass line. If you recall, I talked about the line in Magnum Force with Dirty Harry, and he's out there fighting these this police death squad. Remember, these guys are out there killing felons. Cops are out there killing felons on their own volition and murdering them. And Harry Callahan is tasked with stopping the murders, and he finds out it's the cops. And he's talking to the corrupt lieutenant, and he says, where do we draw the line? We're going to kill jaywalkers. We're going to start killing people for traffic offenses. He says, look, I know the system sucks, and he meant the liberal system that protects criminals and all of the constitutional rights and Supreme Court cases that were coming out in the 60s to protect defendants. He says, but this is the system. Until something better comes along, this is the system, and I'm working within the system. Where do we draw the line? And this is exactly what Franny said back to Colin Farrell, the corrupt cop. You cross the line. When you start murdering people and taking, drug money and drugs, you cross the line. And I mean, one could argue it sounds like such a weak argument by Franny, because he knew there was some corruption. Even when his father later in the movie says to him, were you in on this? Were you in on this? And Franny turns around to his dad and he's like, hey, I knew enough. I knew enough. And that was his sin as a supervisor. So drawing the line, look, cops are not the judges, juries, and executioners. That's it. We have to talk about that in training. We have to talk about that at our academies. All right? The police have limited authority to find reasonable suspicion, probable cause to make a stop, to make a search, to make an arrest. All right? There are limitations that we have on the profession with the badge that we wear. And young officers have to appreciate those limitations. So let me get back to the competing interests real quick, though. There's Ed Norton's character had all his competing interests. Jon Voight's character, the captain and the paternal patriarch of this family, he has his interest to protect the family name, protect Franny's career, his son's career. Sandy, the corrupt cop who called Tazo, he felt he had a competing interest. He knew he had a competing interest to try and save Tazo's life in competing with his own corrupt crew that were going to go kill him. So he had to deal with all of that guilt. And he knows very well, and that's why he eventually takes his life. He's the one who condemned the 4 officers because he's the one who made the call. No one else asked him to make the call. He made that call, and he could not live with that guilt. And then finally, I would argue that Colin Farrell's character, his greed. I talk about temptations all the time in policing. And this is about greed. Colin Farrell's greed, transcends his loyalty to the badge, his loyalty to the profession, his loyalty to his family. He married into this police family. His greed was and the temptations that, and I talk about in temptations in policing. What I mean is that officers have to have character, and they have to have character every day, because it's in the dark alleys and in the dark crack houses where there are no cameras, even though there are cameras all over today. And I warn my students about that. Everybody's got a video in their phone. There's security cameras all over buildings. Just act constitutionally. But there's temptation to abuse power, police power, abuse authority. And if no one's looking and there's no accountability, so what if I take the antique clock from the B&E, the scene of the B&E? No one's going to miss it. They'll assume the burglars took it, and I'm going to take it. And what's the big deal? It's no loss to anyone. They'll get it written off in their insurance coverage when they report the B&E to their insurance company. It's that type of rationale in corruption, in police corruption, that cops it's a vicious cycle. It's a cancer. It's literally a cancer. If you start illegally making traffic stops, then illegally taking money off of traffic stopped citizens. You didn't give them a ticket, but it was a wink and a nod. You take money off of them, and kind of the ticket goes away. It's a corruption that just builds and builds and builds, and once it's found out, it just ruins cops' lives, their careers. They lose their pension. If it's felonious activity, they go to prison. I mean, they don't think of this. And then this leads me to my next trope, which is self-delusion. Self-delusion in policing. Cops there are cops out there that are felons. They're criminals. They shouldn't have been on the job. I mean, we're talking out of the 80,000 police officers in this country, maybe there's 2%, I don't know what the figure is, 2% of rogue cops, and we have to get rid of them. They should never have been hired, okay? But that's not the issue today. We'll get rid of them eventually. But it's these temptations that when no one's looking, they engage in behavior that they would never have engaged in. Well, they have this self-delusion that I'm still a good cop. Despite the fact that I'm stealing drugs and stealing money and beating people up and putting people in fear, I'm a good cop though. I'm doing my best to protect society, the good people of society, the middle class, the people who pay their taxes. I'm a good cop. And it's the same thing. And there's a scene, same thing with Jon Voight. There's a scene where he's had a couple too many, and it's the family Christmas party. And he's going around the room talking about how great his kids are. It's the very beginning of the movie. And how great his kids are and how accomplished they are. And sitting right there at the Christmas table, of course, is the Colin Farrell character with his wife and his kids, and they're a family and loving and all that. And yet we know already as the audience that he's a criminal, that the Colin Farrell character is a criminal. The irony of him sitting there at this police family table, knowing full well of what his crimes are, that he put a hit out on Angel Tezo, it's just mind-boggling. And self-delusion is an issue in policing. It's a way of rationalizing their own police misconduct. And we have to be cognizant of that, especially as supervisors. But, it's a challenge. Look, no one's questioning. It's a challenge being a police officer every day. But this idea that I'm bipolar, I can be a constitutional cop over here, but I'm committing crime over here. Like, for example, one of the officers is an addict. Eddie or Kenny, I can't remember. One of them is a drug addict. All right, so he's a drug addict, but he's still enforcing the law. But he's high. There's this consternation within himself, and it's a problem when it comes to character and integrity in policing as we see it. So look, I want to get forward here to one of the keys of what I'm talking about, and what the Department of Justice is actually talking about as well. And I just mirror what they write and what they say. And it's, look, there's this ongoing issue of de-escalation of force. I say in my training, you also have to have a de-escalation of emotions. A de-escalation of emotions. When cops lose their composure, that's when bad things happen. That's when civil suits happen. They lose their composure. They're meant to be professional, but they're only human. But we have to learn to de-escalate our emotions in certain situations. And that also involves what the DOJ is pushing is intervening. Intervening. I talked before about my partner, Vic Cinco, taught me everything I needed to know to be a police officer. If he saw something going down that just wasn't right, he said, stop it. Stop it. You don't want to screw up your career, and I'm not going to lie for you. Stop that behavior, whatever it is. It doesn't have to necessarily have been unconstitutional, but what if it's unethical? The bottom line is there's a duty. We have an overt duty in police today to intervene before another cop acts illegally, inhumanely, unethically, is disrespectful to human dignity. I've talked about those before. It's our job to train in intervention. There's a case out there, real quickly, there's a case out there where a sergeant, I believe, he was shaking his pepper spray. There was a citizen handcuffed in the backseat of the police car, and he was still mouthing off. And the sergeant comes in, he's going to spray him, even though he's no threat to anybody. And he's going to spray him, and this female officer grabs the back of that officer, pulls him out before he sprays, and makes that poor decision of use of force on the use of force continuum. There was no force there. He didn't have a justification to use the pepper spray. She pulls him back, and he turns around. He's so out of control, he grabs her by the neck. Her, a police officer. He lost it. He lost it. And look, we're human. I get it. But that's the whole point of intervention, the concept of intervention. Intervening before another officer makes a career mistake. And then, of course, brings distrust from the community. And it's the optics, brings negative optics to the department, to the officer himself, to his family, if it's felonious behavior. So lastly, I want to address mental health as a result of this movie as well. Sandy committing suicide, feeling there was no other way. Once he had to resign. Many police officers, and suicide in policing is very tragic. It's a very tragic number. I don't know the percentage, but once he was told to resign, what more did he have in his life? That's it. So he confessed to the journalists and commits suicide. But also in training, what we try to say to our recruits is, remember, look, no one told me this in the academy. When you go out on the streets, and I'm talking the east side of Detroit, the inner city, the disenfranchised neighborhoods, you're dealing with the mentally ill every day. You're dealing with the mentally ill. You're dealing with addicts. You're dealing with people who are high. You're dealing with people who are desperate. You're dealing with convicts who don't want to go back to prison. So they don't think rationally. You may say, let me see your hands. Put your hands up, get on your knees, do this, do that. And instead they pull a gun and just start shooting. Why? Because they just don't want to go back to prison if they're a convict. They're not thinking, they just want to get away. They just want to get away. And all officers have to be appreciative of that. That, look, we're not dealing with rational, logical individuals. Most of the time, we're dealing with people who are mentally affected in one way or the other, or they even have a bias toward the police, and they hate the police. And that's just a reality of life, but we have to deal with it. And so, so that's my point on mental health. The bottom line is, from an artistic standpoint, the movie is, I don't know, as a piece of art, it's a pretty good movie. It's an interesting storyline. The characters, I think the acting is incredible. The screenwriting, I think, was pretty good. It ends with the question mark of hierarchical accountability. Walking up the court steps is Franny in his uniform and Ed Norton in his uniform, and then their father right next to him. And we don't know, is Franny going to lose his job? Is he going to go up there and say, yes, this was all on me, I was a poor supervisor, how could there be drug dealers and whatnot under my command? And hierarchical accountability means accountability goes up. Many times in policing, supervisors will distance themselves from subordinates who engage in misconduct. But the concept of hierarchical accountability means, no, you're the supervisor. You're the one who was in charge. You're the one who knew or should have known about the misconduct, and you are held responsible. So we don't really know how that's where the movie ends. We don't know what the disposition is of Franny and whatnot, but either way, a good teaching tool. So if you're doing your homework, honestly, there's no homework for the next episode because I'm not quite convinced what we're going to do. I'm real eager to jump on and look at vigilantism in the movies. Batman, maybe Mississippi Burning, Untouchables, and Dexter, maybe even Deadpool. I don't know yet, but the concept of vigilantism, of going outside of the law in order to protect society from serious predators. On that note, be safe, and remember, good cops always have your six.